Now, here I've got an interesting table which deals with this very question. Are past winners future winners? So I want you to have a look at the top line, and we're going to move across it. Here we're looking at top quartile funds that are coming out of the United States of America. This data is put together by Standard & Poor's. So you see in September 07, just looking at all domestic funds, there were 530 funds which were top quartile. Now the question is, how many of those funds were top quartile a year later in September 08? And the answer is, of that original 530, only 15%. Now moving on a year to September 09, how many of those top quartile funds in September 07 were still top quartile in September 09? And the answer is 4%. Likewise, moving on a year forward to September 10, it gets even lower. We move to 2%. And when we go out 4 years later, September 11, none of the funds that were top quartile in September 07 are still top quartile in September 11. And as you'll see, this is a pattern across all categories of funds. So what we're seeing here is there is no persistence in top quartile performance, in excellent performance. So taking the past and the recent past as a predictor of future performance can be highly dangerous to your financial wealth, and it's certainly no justification for paying high fees to managers. Now the question also is, can we pick those 1 or 2% winners? Here's an interesting slide. What we see as the gray circle is the universe of US equity funds in 1970. There were 355 funds. Well, what's interesting is in 2005, 35 years later, only 132 of those original 355 funds are still around on the block. And when we actually analyze their performance, we see only 9 funds were actually showed a degree of skill, but they were inconsistent winners over the entire 35 years. And there was only 3 funds were able to consistently and in a skilled fashion deliver extra value for their clients. And the question is, if we'd gone back in 1970, how would we have been able to identify the 3 funds out of the 355? And the answer is, it's really virtually impossible. So, if past performance is not the best predictor of future performance, what is? Well, funnily enough, and interestingly enough, it's actually fees. Now, again, here's an interesting table. We're looking at fund management fees and risk-adjusted returns. And I want you to look at the top line, which is the first decile, which is showing you that is the funds which were the least expensive. And what we see is the funds that were least expensive were actually the ones that gave the best return. On the other hand, if we move down to the very bottom, which is the 10th decile, in other words, those funds which had the most expensive fees, again, you see those had the lowest return. So, what comes out of this? Past performance is not a reliable indicator of future performance. But what we do see from this data is that the best predictor of future fund performance, believe it or not, is actually the level of fees. And this was confirmed by a study carried out by Morningstar in 2010, where it showed that in every single time period and data point tested, low-cost funds beat high-cost funds. I repeat, low-cost funds beat high-cost funds. Now, what we really need to understand is what are the fees that are associated with different fund groups. If it follows that high fees predict future poor performance and one of the best indicators, let's have a look at the kind of funds that are out there in the market and the fees and level of fees that you are paying to be invested in those funds. So here we have some data that's coming out of the UK market. In the first column, you can see that the average passive, or if you will, tracker UK equity fund has a cost of about 0.3%. If we move on to active funds, That means funds where managers are actually betting against the market or betting against the index by being overweight one share and underweight another. There's a massive jump in fees to 1.5%. If we move on to a fund-of-fund structure where you have a fund, a master fund, which is then investing in sub-funds, the cost rises to 2.3. Now let's take that 2.3% figure and compare it with the actual historic after inflation. That's your real inflation-adjusted return on UK equities over a very long period. That's been around 5% over inflation. Now, if you've been paying 2.3% a year to your fund-of-fund manager, you've been giving up nigh half your return to your advisors. Doesn't sound like a very good deal to me. So, let's have a look at some independent research here produced by the Financial Service Authority here in the UK. They had an interesting paper that looked at the price of retail investing. They came to the following conclusions. Retail investors are unaware of their full charges. You may well be aware of what you are paying your investment manager to manage your portfolio, his annual fee. But are you totally aware of the cost of the underlying funds that he is putting in your portfolio? That's question number one. Number two, investors do not understand how charges can affect their performance, and I'm going to show that effect to you in a moment. And the charges that are out there in terms of data that clients and investors can look at, the data is incomplete. And certainly here in the UK, the US is better, but here in the UK, it can present a misleading picture. Not all the true costs are out there and are entirely visible. And the fascinating thing here is those non-explicit costs, the costs which you don't see on your statement, account for about half the total cost of portfolio management. Now, why am I banging on about fees to you? Because the fact of the matter is that fees matter. We've already seen that high fees are the best predictor out there of future poor performance. Well, here I want to show you the effect of different fee rates on a portfolio which gave exactly the same return. So if we assume a 6.5% annualized return over 30 years for a portfolio which started with £1 million, at a 1% fee per annum all in, you can see your portfolio will grow to nigh on £5 million. On the other hand, with a 2% fee, so it's only 1% more, doesn't seem to be that much, your total drops quite significantly to 3,745,000. And at a 3% fee, well, you can see it's only 2.8 million, almost half the identical portfolio which only had a 1% fee. So please, I really do implore you, you really need to get to the bottom of what you're paying by way of all fees and charges, explicit and implicit, revealed and unrevealed, because 1% difference you can see over the long term, because of the power of compounding, makes such an enormous difference. So that is secret number 2. Pay attention to fees. Let's share with you secret number 3. So secret number 3 is, and this is another question I want to ask you, is it cost effective for you to pay more for unforced errors? You know, we've currently got Wimbledon going on here in London. If you watch the tennis, many times the fate of a match is actually determined not by the skill of the opponent, but actually the unforced errors that a player makes during the course of play. Now, you may say, what on earth has this got to do with investing? Okay, well, the fact of the matter is we all know that most accidents are a result of human error. In fact, 90% of car accidents are as a result of human error. And we've got the chairman of the International Organization for Road Accident Prevention backing us up on this and confirming this. So how does this apply in the world of investing? So I want to introduce you to a very good friend of mine. I want to introduce you to Orlando. If you haven't met Orlando before, Orlando is a cat.